They kind of buried the lead on chapter 38. They introduce three new concepts: the relative clause of characteristic, the dative of reference, and the supine. And the supine is definitely the most important of these three. So the relative clause of characteristic, I think, is best understood by looking at this final example here. Hic est liber quem omnes legant versus hic est liber quem omnes legunt. Okay? So the second example is the sort of standard relative clause. Legunt is an indicative verb, and quem, of course, referring back to liber, is your accusative relative pronoun, and it's telling you some information about that book. I mean, relative clauses are doing that in general, so both kinds of relative clauses are giving you information. It's what kind of information they're giving you. An indicative verb tells you a fact about that. All people, omnes, everyone, is reading this book. Legunt quem, referring back to liber. Whereas if you have a subjunctive verb, it needs to be some sort of removal from reality, right? That's what subjunctives do. And in practice, that's not so abstract. They had conventional ways of using that sort of subjunctive in different kinds of constructions. And what this chapter is teaching you is that when Latin speakers used a subjunctive verb in a relative clause giving you more information about a noun, so in a relative clause that's clarifying you a noun for you, which is what relative clauses do, that it's giving you information about what is characteristic rather than factual or indicative. So hic est liber, this is the book. Legant, subjunctive, omnes legant quem, means that it's the kind of book that everyone is reading, that everyone reads. That all read is what they give, or that all would read. Both are sort of within the realm of possibility. So it's sort of strange because in English, to translate that, to make it about what's characteristic, we act like they insert the word kind in front of the noun, in front of liber, which is funny because we're not making any changes there, right? That's the same, hic est liber. The point is that the relative clause now gives you information that is, I don't know how to say it. It's characteristic. It's the thing that is, it's a sort of, there's technical terminology for this. It's sort of gnomic or something. It's sort of typical. So read through these examples, but I think that's the clearest one. There are some who do this. That is, it's saying there are the kinds of people who would, as opposed to there are people who do this as a fact. So, sort of a nuance, but important to watch out for. Watch out for subjunctives in relative clauses that that would change the meaning of the entire sentence to be now a matter of characterizing rather than reporting facts. The dative of reference or interest is similarly the sort of thing that's sort of hard to translate quite right. What it's doing is it's dative, so it's got this sort of adverbial type function for the sentence, and it's doing this sort of abstract thing where it is telling you that for me or for you usually is what we usually find, but or for some group of people, the final example, Claudia est sapiens multis. It's relativizing the whole claim, the whole sentence, for or to. Relativizing is the wrong word. It is saying that for or to a person, there's a person whose interest or perspective is particularly relevant for understanding the claim of the sentence. One example of how this is weird, look at the third example here. Nullius culpae mihi conscius sum. So I am conscious, conscius sum, of no fault, nullius culpi. Mihi. So they translate in my own heart, which is a wild over translation, but it's getting at the right idea here. The claim that I'm conscious of no fault is that whole claim is being saying this is true with respect to me in some sense that the context is going to have to suggest. In this case, it's probably like no fault for me or in me with respect to me. In your breast is a funny way to translate tibi. Oh, well, I guess pectus. So I see. So yeah. So looking up one, pectus, keret tibi pectus inani ambatione. So is your breast free, pectus, from vain ambition, empty, inani ambatione. Tibi. So like, is this the question I just asked true? For you in particular, from your perspective, from the way you're seeing things. Watch out. Here's how to think about this. If you have an extra mihi, an extra tibi, an extra dative plopped in, and it might make sense to relativize the question, the claim, the interest with respect to with reference to a person, consider the dative of reference. Finally, the supine. The one that actually matters, or the most common of the three things in this chapter and the most important. This is another kind of verbal noun. So you've known several things that are like this, right? The participle is the verbal adjective, which means it's an adjective. Remember, the second thing is what it actually is. It's an adjective. But the verbal is an adjective modifying the word adjective. So it is a verbal adjective, meaning it is an adjective that brings verbal type information with respect to verbs. You've learned the infinitive as a verbal noun. You've learned the gerund as a verbal noun. You've learned the gerundive as a different kind of verbal adjective that creates a verbal noun phrase or verbal noun clause. Okay, so those are all your verbal noun things. This is another kind of verbal noun. It is most similar in function to the gerund. It's defective. It only appears in 2 cases. And it only appears in those cases in sort of set constructions. It's not quite set phrases, but only in specific contexts. So this is some sort of leftover piece of the language that only lingers in particular use cases. The 2 cases it appears in, and again, worth noting, it's a 4th declension verbal noun, so the ablative is going to look really distinctive. This is the nice thing about it. It's going to look just like your 4th principal part in the accusative. That's confusing. We'll come back to that in a second because there's something to help clarify that. But in the ablative, it's going to look totally distinctive because it's got this U. It's a 4th declension ablative that looks like it's derived from the 4th principal part, amatum, right? Amatu, amatum. So the ablative functions as an ablative of respect. That something is true with respect to verbal idea. So, the example they give is mirabile, something is amazing with respect to dictu, with respect to speaking. Amazing to say, perhaps. Facile factu, easy to do, right? Facile factu. Easy for doing. So if you see one of these, you know, okay, it's with respect to the verbal action that this supine is derived from. That one's easy because it looks distinctive and it's just an ablative of respect with respect to verbal action. A little bit harder, but not that bad, is the accusative supine. This looks like your perfect passive participle in the accusative or neuter nominative singular. And so you'll be tempted when you see these to treat this as a participial phrase, right? Regatum pecuniam right here. Regatum pecuniam right here could look like something like money which was asked for, right? All by itself, it could look like pecuniam regatum. That we're going to have this. Pecuniam is in the accusative. It's going to be the direct object of some verb. And it is, what kind of money is it? It's money that was asked for. It was requested money, right? And regatum pecuniam, in a different context, could be that. The genders are weird here. If they matched in gender, this would work. It doesn't work here because the genders don't match, but could work with a different example. The nice thing, though, is that kind of confusion shouldn't be possible because the accusative supine only appears with verbs of motion. Verbs of going. So ibant, used here, can't take a direct object. So you should not be tempted, neither can wenent, right? The verb to go and to come. These verbs cannot take a direct object. So you should not be tempted to treat pecuniam and the thing that looks like a participle but isn't actually a participle, the thing that looks like a participle next to it, you should not be tempted to treat those as direct objects. I mean, you'll still be tempted, but then you'll see the verb and say, oh, verbs of going can't take a direct object. It must be something else. So what is it? Well, it's a defective verbal noun, just like the ablative supine. A defective verbal noun, defective meaning just like all the other parts of this have fallen out of use. So we don't have a nominative, genitive, dative use of the supine. They don't have plurals. We don't have whatever else might have this made sense as part of doesn't exist anymore. It is a defective verbal adjective that looks like an accusative neuter perfect passive participle, but it's not. Instead, it's a verbal noun that is just giving you purpose, that is describing the purpose for which that verb of motion was undertaken. Why did they go, ibant? Why did they come, went, they go, or they came? So let's do one at a time. They were going in order to ask, for the purpose of asking. Why did they come, went, they came for the purpose of persuading, to persuade. And then the verb to persuade takes a dative, so we have amicis, to persuade friends, to persuade their friends. Okay? So the verb, interesting thing about that is this verb, persuado, it's going to, the verbal noun is going to take direct objects or, other things can be built around that, its object or its indirect object, in the same way you would treat if it was just the verb there. If we just got rid of the coming and you can say they persuaded their friends. They persuaded their friends, you'd use the amicis, you'd use the dative. So it's a verbal noun. It should link you back to that verbal idea, the fundamental verb. But it's going to look like a accusative singular perfect passive participle, and it's not. It is a verbal noun that indicates purpose, and the way to recognize it is it's going to look like an accusative with a verb of going, which wouldn't make any sense.